In this live stream, I'm going to answer all of your most common study questions and hopefully give you the answer that you're looking for based on cognitive science. So the first question that I got was actually in person, and this guy, I was sitting in the cafeteria, came up to me. He's like, "Hey, how do you study when you're sick?" Right? Obviously, he wasn't sick at the time, but it's a good question because I think there's a lot of people that don't realize that your brain and your body actually have a limit, and there's several ways to optimize it, but there's also a lot of ways that can influence the performance that you actually have, not only on tests, but also when you're encoding the information. And so there's a lot to get into here. So let's really unpack it. On the surface, it might seem like, this is a pretty straightforward question. You just get around the times when you're tired, but there's actually a lot more to that. So studying when sick, this is the first question. To answer this question, there's a couple things that you need to understand. First of all, there's the theory of allostasis. So allostasis theory. And that also has to do with cognitive load. And then, the next part of this too is the theories of encoding and retrieval. And all of this combined is going to give you a very well-rounded answer to this question, because like I said, on the surface, studying when sick, it seems like a pretty straightforward thing. You just do a little bit less. But if you're going to use the energy that you have, there's a lot of ways to make sure that you use it effectively and you don't just end up reducing the total amount of hours or, amount of energy that you put into it. But yeah, it can get very tricky. So I'm just gonna screen record this real quick, just so I can get this on. All right, so let's get into this. Studying when sick. What do you do? What is allostasis theory? So let's cover allostasis theory first. Here, allostasis. Now, you might have heard of homeostasis, which is essentially when the body tries to keep itself in an optimal state, right? It doesn't want to be too hot, doesn't want to be too cold, doesn't want to, not move enough, but also doesn't want to move too much, right? It's very in the middle, because we are not cold-blooded animals, right? Cold-blooded animals, they kind of go with the temperature, so they decrease in energy as it gets cold. They increase in energy as it gets hot. We try to stay the same, but that requires a lot of energy. And allostasis is the theory that you have multiple homeostases that have to do with certain cognitive domains. So in simple terms, it's basically for each type of thing, you have a different homeostasis, right? You might be able to sustain higher levels of productivity and focus on one thing, but on another, it's much lower, right? And so this is allostasis. So when you think of cognitive load, right? Cognitive load, you have something that looks like this, and it's a graph. So let's say it increases here. Oh no, it goes down, then it goes back up, and then it climbs really high. Oh no, you're stressed. And then it comes a little bit back down here, tapers off. Okay, let's say that you can handle this amount of stress right here. So this is the amount of cognitive load. It's gonna be really hard to write. Cognitive load. And then each of these is a stressor. So stressor. This is time. And this right here is your allostasis. Okay, that's terrible writing, but you can do what it's supposed to say. So here's what happens. First, you get a stressor, right? let's say it's stress because you have an exam coming up. Okay, you're fine, you can handle that. But when you get sick, let's say the second one is like, so this is just general stress, but this one is being sick. All of a sudden, it moves how stressed you are above your allostatic baseline. So you actually enter something. I'll draw another graph here. Think of it like this. So whenever you go above your homeostasis or allostasis, you have 3 phases. The first one is it's like the alarm phase. And this is when your body's like, oh my gosh, there's stress I can't handle. It's too much. I'm freaking out. And it starts pumping you full of like all these stress hormones like cortisol and, you know, norepinephrine, epinephrine kind of stimulate that fight or flight. And it's good to limit stress, but over time, if it's sustained for too long, you know, it can cause a lot of havoc. And one of them being it dampens your immune system. And so you can actually be sick for even longer if you try to push for too long. So we want to avoid that. So after the alarm phase, you get the resistance phase or reactance phase. Okay. And then after the resistance phase, you have, I actually forget what this phase is. Like less stress or something. The adjustment maybe. And this is where your body will allow you to handle a new level of stress. So if it was originally here, now it's going to be here. And you know, you had, or this actually would be, this is the exhaustion phase, but the adjustment comes after. So adjustment, and this is the exhaustion. And what happens in the exhaustion phase here is that your body, if you sustain it for too long, again, you get exhausted. The sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight nervous system, as opposed to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest nervous system. That's responsible for calming you down, helping you go to sleep. The problem is if you are too stressed for too long, your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, doesn't deregulate, and it makes it very difficult to rest and recover and sleep. And sleep is your primary focus when you're trying to recover. So that's this whole theory on cognitive load. But eventually, when you face this part right here, then maybe your body learns to tolerate that. But then you have, an exam that's coming up here, and it creates more stress. And so maybe your sickness was going down, but now it starts to come back up again. And that contributes to a new level of stress, which is now above your current allostatic baseline. So you can see where I'm going with this is that if you put too much energy in for too long and you don't scale back and let yourself rest, then you actually keep yourself sick for longer. You exhaust the body more. You have less energy and less cognitive focus. So how do you get around this? How do you make sure that you can deal with being sick? Well, let's focus on the encoding and retrieval part now, this aspect here. So let's dive right into that. So the brain works somewhat like this. You have a stimulus, and that leads to short-term memory or sensory memory. And then after sensory memory, it goes into short-term memory. And then I'll move this up a little bit. Okay, after short-term memory, you go into long-term memory. Okay, there's another question here. I'll answer this after this one. But the question, actually, I'll read it later. Just know that I've seen your question, and I'll get to it in a sec. So we have all of this, right? Stimulus, sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. When you get the stimulus, to get it, so it automatically goes into sensory memory, but to get it into short-term memory, you need to give it attention. And then to get it into long-term memory, you need to do something called elaborative rehearsal. And to keep something in short-term memory, you do something called maintenance rehearsal. What are both of these? Maintenance rehearsal basically means you repeat something over and over again until you've kind of got it down, or until you can write it down. Essentially, think of somebody gives you their number and you're trying to remember their phone number, and so you just repeat it over and over again until you can write it down or put it in your phone. That's what maintenance rehearsal is. Elaborative rehearsal, on the other hand, is when you connect the new information to information that you already know and put it in a context that you already know. So it's basically taking new stuff, connecting it to the old stuff. That will help it stay and stick with the old stuff. So that is kind of how the brain works here. But there's two processes. So the process of going from, so taking information in short-term memory into long-term memory, this part is called encoding. And the retrieval of the long-term memory back into conscious attention. So taking, let's move this down a little bit. And here. Okay, so moving this back here, that is called retrieval. What happens when you are limited on cognitive energy is that you might not have an encoding problem. You might be giving something your attention and you might be able to connect it to long-term memory or to everything that's already there to get it to long-term memory. The problem is you might have an issue with the retrieval part, and that's what you really need to focus on, because that's the part that is going to make it really difficult if you can't do it to get any points on the exam, because you might have the best mental framework in the world, but if you're going into an exam and you can't retrieve that information, it doesn't matter. And so a lot of the time, the issue is not with getting the information into your brain, it's with getting the information out of your brain into the real world and onto the paper, so that the professor knows that you're actually a genius and not sick or, not doing poorly in the class. So that is the process of encoding and retrieval. So now that you understand both those contexts, let's go through a strategy that I would do if I were sick and trying to prepare for an exam. So let's say that my exam was coming up. I'll give it 5 days. I would review, just sit in bed, lie in bed, do nothing except for just refamiliarize myself with the information. So that would be, I usually do not recommend taking notes or rewriting notes or rewatching lectures or rereading notes instead of actually doing something with them. But the reality is, if you're cramming for an exam, you probably don't remember what was said in the beginning of the course. So you need to refamiliarize. So this is day one. Day one, we're going to refamiliarize. While lying in bed and do nothing. Bedridden. Okay, day two. Oh, also here, sleep as much as possible, because sleep is the number one thing that's going to help you recharge. So try to sleep 10 hours a day plus a 2-minute nap, 12 hours a day. And eat a lot of food and drink absurd amounts of water. Absurd amounts of water, we're talking, okay, I'm guessing the average person probably drinks about 2, maybe 1.5 liters per day. Okay, that's generous. I drink about 8 to 9 liters a day. When you're sick, you get some Mio, which is essentially electrolytes, squirt it into your water and try to drink. There's no way if you drink 1 to 1.5 liters per day, you're not gonna be able to drink 2 gallons like me. But also I sweat a lot because I'm on the rowing team, so it's kind of necessity. But I would recommend drinking at least 1 gallon. And to get it down, you know, Mio, it tastes good too. It's like there's like orange flavor. I really like the orange flavor. So just drink an absurd amount of liquids with a lot of electrolytes. Not only is it going to help you focus because your body is creating mucus, which takes up a lot of you know, liquid resources, and also you're sweating more because your basal temperature is raised. So you know, you might not feel it, but you are perspiring a lot more. So you actually need to drink a lot more water. Plus, drinking water pretty much helps with everything. So, you know, you don't want to dehydrate your cells when they're trying to fight off the infection. The day 2, that's my little rant there. So day 1, refamiliarized, bedridden. Day 2, now you can actually start doing some stuff, right? You're probably still sick. You probably don't want to study, but I'm going to make it really easy for you. So all you're going to do is you're going to do practice questions, and that's it. Because honestly, it doesn't really make sense to spend your time doing something that doesn't replicate the way you're going to be tested on an exam. There is no point in cramming for an exam by doing the things that you're not going to be asked to do on an exam. Your professor does not care how well you can reread notes and rewatch lectures. That is just for you to refamiliarize yourself with the information and know what to study. But the actual studying, you need to do it exactly as you're going to be tested. So you need to practice doing practice questions. That's multiple choice, short answer questions, long answer questions, and also making mind maps. If you watch the last live stream that I did, those like 45 minutes ago, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, just go back and watch that after that. But essentially, yes. So this part is going to be just spam practice questions, cues. And a note on this, if you don't have enough, make your own. You can either do this by yourself or you can do this with AI. Either way, it does not matter. It's better to do it yourself, but you also don't have as much cognitive energy. So it might just be better to have something make the questions for you. When you do it yourself, if you're healthy, there's something called the self-generation effect, which essentially, well, it's also the levels of processing effect. So you will get a much better benefit if you have created the thing yourself, because it is created in a way that you understand. When something gives you questions, you don't have the benefit of knowing the context that was behind creating those questions. It's the same thing as reading other people's notes, reading your friends' notes. You know, it's never as good because they've written it in a way that makes sense to them, but they don't have the same background and context that you do. And so it might not make as much sense. And so if you interpret it one way, it might not actually be the way that is supposed to be interpreted for the exam. So be wary of this, but it can help in a pinch because you're sick and you don't want to miss your exam. So that's day 2. And after this, so always after this, you go through. So I'm actually going to make a full video on how to go through practice exams, because I have a very sophisticated strategy that took a long time to figure out, but I'm not going to get into it here because I just want to get through this question. So make your own and then review as well. Review the answers. So this would be the step that I would call the mistake log. Source. Okay, day 3. You're just going to do as many as possible, but ideally 2 full-length exams. And I can tell you right now that this is not going to take you more than 2.5 hours. It shouldn't. That's pretty much all the studying that you would need to do. If you're really, 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 really behind, okay, fine, maybe do 3. But then you're just going to repeat that again to the next day, and then day 4. Boom. Okay. Now you're on day 5. This is the day before your exam. Or maybe your exam is at night on this day. So what you're going to do is you're going to rest. Or actually, sorry, you're going to do one practice exam in the morning. And then you're going to rest. Here, everything in long-term memory, LTM, is maintained. And before exam, oh, going off the page here. Before your exam, cram as much information as possible, so info, into short-term memory. Then you're going to do a brain dump as soon as you get into the exam. Like I've talked about very, very extensively. But essentially, the stuff in short-term memory, it's going to go somewhere if you don't practice it. So you might as well just save it until the end, like right before your exam. I would recommend doing this about 30 minutes before your exam starts. The stuff in long-term memory, it's not going to go anywhere. You've done so many practice exams at this point. You've probably done 6 to 9 full-length practice exams. And at that point, if you've given all of your stuff to an AI and just said, like, make the questions that are most likely to show up in the exam, you're probably not going to be surprised by any of the questions at that point. And you will probably have a pretty good understanding. You know, you don't necessarily need to be able to recreate it word for word, but you should be able to hit, you know, the key terms if you were to put it into bullet points. And you can just write it in your own words. And I've done this once when I was sick and many times when I am not sick, and it works incredibly well. So that's what I'd recommend if you're sick. So that was a pretty in-depth explanation, but I hope you found that helpful. So let's go to the next question. Let me go back to the chat here. I prefer Google Gemini. I find it's the most helpful, unless it's for finding sources, in which case, if that's allowed for your assignment, I would use Perplexity. Okay. The next question is how to fix attention span for ADHD people like me. I struggle with work, but then I doom scroll for hours and do something else. Okay. This one I could talk about a lot. I will give you a very, very basic rundown, and then I'll recommend you a resource at the end that's free. So for attention, imagine your attention is like this. You for any assignment, right, you're gonna have, oh, that's not working. Okay, there we go. A graph that looks like this, and this is the importance line. This is the line of importance. Line of importance. You will not work on this project or work on or study or anything until the perceived importance, so this is line of perceived importance, crosses this threshold, right? This is the, or line of, this will be line of action. So until it crosses this line, you won't take action. That's just how your brain works. I have ADHD too, and you know, one of the craziest things is that consequence is not part of the equation. It literally has no impact on how we operate, which is crazy to think, but it's true. So how do you deal with this? Well, I'm going to go through procrastination, and then I'm going to go through focus a little bit, and then I'll recommend you everything that I think you should also go through to build off of that. So to deal with procrastination, right? Because obviously you're not going to start until this point here. So what do we do? Well, first of all, you can take any task, break it up into smaller tasks. Well, first of all, you need to actually read the instructions, because I guarantee you that most of you do not look at the instructions until like fairly soon before the project is due, or you know, re-look at the notes that you took or the pictures from class. If you took pictures of a slide, you're probably not going to look at it. So I would just, you know, actually read the instructions. And then here's what you can do, because there's two things that are keeping you from taking action. Number one is that there's an unknown amount of energy that's required to complete the task. And in the unknown, in an event of something unknown, your brain reverts to safety. And so it will not give you the energy to go and do something difficult if it doesn't know how much energy it's going to cost. Because what happens if it's too much? You expel too much energy, and then a bear comes and tries to kill you. You're going to die, right? So it wants to save some reserve in the tank. So the way that you tell your brain that it's safe is, you know, okay, it's only going to take this many hours and this many days, and it's okay. Not that bad, right? And you at least need to know what you need to do. Then once you do that, you can break it up into smaller tasks. So instead of, you know, your line looking like this at the top, it's going to look more like this. You're going to have a lot of little tasks and a lot more time above this line here. Then what you do is that you assign each of these arbitrary deadlines. That's pretty much how you eliminate procrastination. You defeat the unknown energy and you assign arbitrary deadlines. After procrastination, then comes the tricky part of maintenance. So avoid burnout. There's two ways to avoid burnout. One, so this is something that I call the burnout equation. The amount of effort that you spend on something, how intense it is, how much cognitive energy it uses, multiplied by the number of hours, divided by the number of results, minus 1, so that you can have negative burnout, because sometimes you can work so hard and so well that you actually can do nothing for a very long time and not have any need or want to do work. So like no internal nagging. So there's two ways you can deal with burnout. One, you can decrease the perceived effort and the number of hours, or you can increase the results, or you can do both. So I guess there's actually 3 ways. Increasing the results, that comes down to how fast you study, how efficiently you study. If you want to know a lot more on that and literally exactly how I study, I have a full video series on my website that explains that. So I'm not going to get into that. But in terms of effort and hours, there's a lot of ways to make something seem like it's less. This part of the burnout equation, I would look at the video. It's a live recording video that I posted from an event. I'm standing in front of a projector that looks like this. It's like big. It's actually not a projector. It's a big screen, and I'm going through slides. And in that, I explain pretty much all of this. So I would go look at that. And then the second part of your question. Oh yeah. Okay. So the next resource I would look at is called there's the Burnout Cure, which is on my website, UofTearless.com. It's free. It comes with an audiobook. And then the second one is Flow State Secrets. That's the main one. So that's for focus, and focus it goes through the flow cycle. So flow, cycle. Okay. Flow is essentially an optimal state of consciousness. It's something in positive psychology that can pretty much be explained by that feeling when you're so locked in that time kind of disappears, and you're just like plowing through work and doesn't seem like you're doing anything. And a lot of the time it comes with doing something that you feel you really love to do. You don't have deadlines and nobody's forcing you to do it, so you have autonomy. And that's usually something. So if you're running, you can get into flow very easily. If you're drawing, you can get into flow very easily. Like all these sorts of things, like painting, even like biking, like BMX, surfing, literally anything you can think of. Like even doing like writing essays if you're actually like very passionate about the essay. So the flow cycle, it goes like this. I'll make this very simple, and then go for the rest of it. Go read or listen to. This one also has an audiobook. The Flow State Secrets PDF that's free on my website. So flow cycle, it pretty much goes like this. You have from here, I'll just split into 4 parts. It's not even, but it's good enough. So here you have the struggle phase. And in the struggle phase, it's really difficult. It lasts about 15 minutes. And then in the next phase, transition phase, this one lasts roughly 2 to 3 minutes. It's hard to qualify whether you're there or not. And then you are in the flow stage. And then after that, it's the recovery. And recovery, my favorite way to do this, I guess, would be, so instead of Pomodoro technique, which I hate, I think it's just ridiculous because it doesn't, if you think of the science of flow, it actually takes you more than half of the time to get into flow than you being working for 25 minutes and then taking 5 minutes off. So I actually do 90 minutes on, 30 minutes off. And I'll do that 3 times. So usually 2 times at the beginning of day, and then 1 time at end of day. I usually can't handle more than 4.5 hours of deep work. The rest of that is going to be shallow work, and I'll throw that in whenever I feel like it and when I have time. So that's how I'd recommend doing it. Okay, next question. My consistency is poor. I study 5 to 6 hours one day, but exhaustion from school ending at 2 p.m. makes me drop to 2 to 3 hours and then stop, failing the required daily 5 to 6 hour goal. I guess my question to you would be, why do you feel like you need to study for 5 to 6 hours? That's a very long time. For a point of reference, I study 2 hours a day. So I guess I'm just curious why you think that 5 to 6 hours is the appropriate amount of time. In the meantime, I'll answer this. I have a few questions from Instagram. Somebody says, how do I be consistent? This pretty much comes down to the types of motivation. So there's many different types of motivation. It would come down to identified motivation. So identified motivation is essentially when you believe that you are someone who does the thing, and you do it because it's you, not because somebody's forcing you to, not because there's an external goal, not even because you love to do it, just because it's who you are, right? I think it's kind of unrealistic to expect all of us to achieve internal motivation, which would be, I am simply doing this because I love to do it. I'm very, very lucky in the fact that I love psychology, but it does not mean that I love every class, and it does not mean that I love studying for every class. So there's that. But in order to do something consistently, you would have to think, who is the type of person that does something consistently or does this thing consistently? So if I want to study for a long time every day, or I want to work out every day, I would have to think, who does this? Oh, top students. And I want to be a top student. So in order to be a top student, I just need to do what the top students do. Then you can just decide, okay, from now on, I'm a top student. I'm going to be a top student. And you need to have a level of faith in yourself that you can actually do that. But to be a top student, all you need to do is do the things that they do. So, well, one, you need to have the ability to do it and to sustain it. There is some degree of like genetics and also your cognitive ability you need to be trained, but it will definitely be trained a lot faster if you actually start doing the things that move the ball. So you can decide, I want to be a really good student. And the moment you decide that for real, not just like saying, I want to be a good student. It's like, I am, and I will be. I'm starting right now. It then creates cognitive dissonance, which is essentially your actions are at odds with your beliefs whenever you don't study. And it's very uncomfortable. And so then it's a much, you get a lot of negative reinforcement, which is essentially removing a punishment. So if you feel like you're really uncomfortable not working when you're supposed to be working, you working is going to remove that discomfort, and that's rewarding. And then eventually you'll suck so little at school that you'll actually be good. And once you're good, then you get positive reinforcement too. And so you start with removing negative and you end with gaining a positive, and you repeat this cycle over and over again, and it becomes an integral part of your life. But you need to shift your identity first. Your identity doesn't come from your actions. I think that's a big mistake. You can, like, you don't do the actions and then eventually you'll become the person, because then where's the end goal? Right? How many actions do I have to take until I become this person? But if you just decide, I'm this person now, then it's very clear that you need to start now and you need to never stop. And yes, it's hard to be a top student. You're talking about the best, right? That means you need to be better than everyone else, which means you need to do things that they won't do, which means you need to do things that are hard. And it is difficult. But in order to stay consistent, that's part of the sacrifice. So maybe that's not for you. Maybe you don't want to be the best. Maybe you want to be fairly above average, right? I feel like that's a pretty decent goal that most of us want. Well, the fact is that the average is where most people are. So you have to be doing things that everybody who wants to be above average also is not doing, in addition to everybody who is in the average. So it's difficult, but you need to shift your identity. Once you shift your identity, you just decide, things start falling into place and you start to see things from a different perspective. It's like, oh, if I'm one of the best, I don't care about going out because that could hinder my grades, and I am one of the best. And if I'm one of the best, that means I get really good grades, and so I can't do things that take away from that. And it doesn't mean you have to give up your life, right? I actually find that you'll be a lot happier, being with people who I don't see as often because they're busy and they're chasing their own goals. And I have 5 friends right now. Back in first year, I had 80 or 82 actually. And I met well over 400 people, remembered all of their names, and talked to them all the time. Now I talk to 5. I'm way happier with my life. And it's not to say because I've settled or accepted things, it's just because I actually did the things that were in line with who I wanted to be. And at the end of second year, I just decided I'm going to be a different person and started acting like that. And to me, it's immediate, right? But to everyone else, they see a transformation because it takes a long time for people to realize that, oh, you've changed. But when they say you've changed, it's usually said with a negative connotation of, oh, you're not doing the things that we used to find fun or that we used to have in common. Like, that's fine. You can drift apart from people. If you're now somebody who you wanted to be, it doesn't matter what other people think. People should accept you for who you are. And if they don't, it's not worth being their friend. Trust me, having fake friendships for the sake of relatedness is not worth it, because you'll be spending time that you actively dislike as opposed to spending time that you're neutral about with yourself. I'm ready for a highly competitive physics, chemistry, math exam that demands deep theory and extensive practice. Revising, studying 5 to 6 hours daily, so I maintain that routine. The thing about studying for so long that I've found is that when people say you need to study hard or you need to study more, a lot of it comes from the fact that people just expect that of top achievers, or that the people who got to the top from the middle, they were the ones that spent a lot of hours, because they did. But the people who have always been at the top, they actually don't study for a very long time. They spend a lot of time thinking and ruminating, but they don't actually sit down a lot and study. Like, I spend maybe 80% of my day just like thinking about things in the context of psychology and from a psychological perspective, just because it's interesting. Like, we have genuine interest, but I don't actually sit down and study that much. To be fair, when I was doing chemistry or biochemistry and molecular genetics, I did study more hours, but I think now I would probably study less and do better than I did back then. And the reason is because my method is more efficient. And so the more efficient you can study, the fewer repetitions you have to do. So if you remember how I explained the way the brain works in terms of, let's see, where was it? Here. So we have maintenance rehearsal at short-term memory, and then elaborative rehearsal to get short-term memory to long-term memory. If you actually connect things, you can get them most of the time on the first or second try. The problem is, if you try to do a bunch of practice questions, right, then you're kind of going through, and I used to do this too. I used to just take the practice questions from the textbook and just do them and just go through all of them. But what I find is a lot more effective is if I just started with the question from class that the professor did. And if, there was no question, then just do this with one textbook question at a time. But I needed to make sure that I could recreate that first before I started doing new things. And I actually think that slowing down will lead to drastically more improvement, because if you just move on without fully understanding, there's no point in moving on, right? So like, it's better to know 50% of 100% of the material, or sorry, 100% of 50% of the material. In other words, you know half of the material incredibly well, than knowing 100% of the material with 50% confidence. Because one way you're guaranteed pretty much a 50, one way you have a 50% chance of, not getting each answer correct. And obviously it multiplies, like you probably wouldn't get a 0, but it also depends unless you're doing random guessing or, whatever. Anyway, that's besides the point. I would recommend just taking one question and doing it over and over until you can't get it wrong, as opposed to trying to go through all of the questions. So as soon as you know the answer, and it's also okay to know the answer before you even attempt the question, you just need to make sure that you can replicate it. And then once you can replicate it, then you need to understand why you can replicate it and like why it works now that you can do it. And then once you know how to do it and why it works, then you can start doing new things. And I would do at least a couple more questions in the same genre. And then if you can get those right too on the first try, on the second try, and actually understand that, then fine, move on. Instead of just doing like 1, 2, 3 and trying to get through as many questions as possible, because the whole point of practice is that it makes sense and you're doing it right. And you need to practice understanding, not practice, computing. Because you can train the skill of computing over and over again, but if you don't actually understand it, when they ask you for the application of it later, you're not going to know. You're just going to know how to like plug and chug numbers, which you can get really good at and really fast and give the illusion of knowing something, or even like, chemical equations. But if you don't understand it and know why it works, then it's just not very effective. And when people recommend, 5 to 6 hours, I used to think that you had to study 8 hours a day. And it was because people were doing that to get better than I did, but they weren't the best. And then when I started taking advice from the best, they were like, oh, I usually don't study that much. And I thought that was because they were smart. I was like, that's so annoying. How can you do this without studying more than me? And then I realized that what I was doing just wasn't effective, and doing more of something that doesn't work doesn't make a difference. And there's a lot to be said for rumination and letting your brain kind of connect the dots for you. So I can't really give you a clear answer, but in terms of like trying to stay consistent, I would just try to do fewer, better hours than trying to just hit a goal number of hours, because it might take you 5, 6 hours to get through everything. It might take you 10. It might take you 3. It doesn't matter, as long as you understand it at the end of the day. And at first, compared to everyone else, you will have to study harder and longer, maybe because you don't have as, grounded a foundation in the context of the course. But over time, you get faster and more efficient, and you know more, and so there's less to learn. And so you're better and have less to learn. So you just get better over time. And you should not, by the end, have to study for 5 to 6 hours. If that's how long it takes now, fine. And that's like the measurement that you took on the first day, then fine. and that's the measurement that the professors say this is what people had to do. I'm just curious, like, which people they were measuring, because it probably wasn't the top students to get the 5 to 6 hours a day. And if that's the measurement that you got on the first day, fine, that's how long it takes you. But don't measure your goal as, you know, an output goal of 6 hours of work. Measure it as an input goal of level of effort, and then your goal is to complete all the questions. But it shouldn't matter how long that takes you, because eventually you will get faster, if that makes sense. I'll move on to the next one. Do I meditate? I do breath work, but it's more for diaphragm training for rowing. So I guess you could count that as meditation, but it's not really focused meditation. It's just breath work, and it's calming. So I guess it's a form of meditation, but I don't really do like visualization or like complete absence of thought training, just because I have tried it. I just didn't find it very helpful, and I tried it for a while. And I wanted to make sure that it actually worked, but I found that, you know, the one that works is the one I'm consistent with. And if I have a secondary benefit of being calmer over time when doing breath work, then that's the one that I'll do, because the primary focus of that is for cardiovascular performance. Would I keep doing breath work if I didn't row? You know, this is funny. I'm skipping a little bit because I'll come back to the procrastination question. I would keep doing breath work if I don't row. Like, I have this device that you breathe into, and it, like, you can set the difficulty. It's not while I exercise. It's just like, it's a completely separate thing. Like, I just sit here and like breathe. But I think I would. And the reason is because as soon as I'm not rowing for my university, I don't think that I will ever stop. Like right now, to be able to be consistent, like I was talking about earlier, I've had to change my identity so much to where, like, so in rowing, we have primary practice and then we have secondaries 6 days a week. I was like, I can get ahead if I do an extra day. So I just don't take rest days. I haven't had a rest day since August of 2024. And I'm actually shockingly way healthier, and like not like, I had a ton of injuries back then and they've pretty much all healed, and my performance is way better now that I haven't taken a rest day. It's definitely not causal. I definitely just got fitter and could handle more volume. But because I made it a part of every day, it just became a part of my identity. And I like purposely shifted my identity. Like, okay, I'm the one who does no fewer than 2 hours of cardio every day. And because of that, it no longer, like, that was the standard. And I didn't matter what other people did. It didn't matter whether, you know, we were on water or it's the winter season. Actually, right now we're in between the fall and winter season. We're doing something called the holiday challenge, which is essentially who can get the most number of minutes of cardio in December. And I didn't really change anything, honestly. Like, I changed nothing from fall to winter to in between to off season. Well, we don't really have an off season. People just go ham in the summer too. But yeah, it's like, it's just an integral part of my everyday life. So like, I get up and I bike when I don't have practice, like morning practice. I'll get up and bike and do flashcards on the bike. And in the afternoon, I'll do like either the rowing machine or go to the gym for a lift or something. But yeah, it's just part of my day. And then I had to be solid in that. And I was like, oh, I'll get an edge if I do breath training too. So I added that in. And it took a long time to make that a habit. But I just started writing it down as the first thing on my to-do list for every day. And it only takes like 8 to 12 minutes, depending on what it assigns me to do. It's like different exercises. But yeah, so I don't think I'll ever stop. I think it's just too ingrained in my identity now. I think the only thing that would stop me would be injury. And I've kind of gotten wiser as to, you know, not do crazy stuff. I used to do like a ton of stupid things. There was a period of time I was running a marathon every weekend on top of the rowing season, and it got so bad where I couldn't sleep. My nervous system was so shot I couldn't downregulate, and so I couldn't sleep, and then I couldn't recover, and then I got injured, and that took me out for 14 months. So I think I learned my lesson. Like I really injured my back doing that. So now it's more of just like slow and steady, and I try to be consistent. So yeah, if I can keep doing that, it means that I'm not regressing, I guess. So the goal would be to slow down slower than everybody else. Okay, how to beat procrastination. That was actually what I covered in one of the first ones, the first question. So here we go. I'll review it again. The line of importance and the line of action. This is an L, not a C. So whenever it's above this line, you're going to take action. But the problem is people don't act on it until it's very close to the deadline. So this is the deadline here. And the way to get around this is to look at the instructions, figure out how much you have to do, break it down into smaller tasks, and then assign each of them arbitrary deadlines. And that way you'll spend a lot more time above this line of action, because consequence for people with ADHD does not matter. So what you need to do is increase the perceived importance, but mainly, you're acting on dopamine, and you get negative reward by removing an uncomfortable feeling, which is the feeling that you get when it's close to a deadline. And so the greater that discomfort, the more dopamine release you'll get when you actually get it done. And so if you want more dopamine, you will you break it into more parts and make the deadlines closer. So you'll actually get more bang for your buck out of doing it that way. Even though it's the same amount of work, you'll spend more time above the line of action. Okay, cover another question here from Instagram. How do you deal with memorization-based courses like biology and psychology? Honestly, just flashcards. I just spam flashcards. Let's see, last winter I made and learned I think it was 4,200 or 4,600 flashcards in, what was it, 6 weeks, I think. And that was pretty ridiculous. But I never spent more than 2 hours studying per day across all 5 of my classes. So yeah, I would just say spam flashcards as much as possible. The software that I use to make it faster is called Anki. It's a free software. You can download it on your computer. If you need to download it on your phone, which I did, it does cost money, but the return on investment for time, I think it's like $20, and I use it a couple, I'd say like probably like 5 to 6 hours per week. Just because I can like do it while waiting in line, or do it while like walking somewhere, or just sitting on like the bus or the metro or something. So huge benefit having that. And then you can also type them. I never recommend writing your flashcards by hand. It's too slow. Yes, you get a benefit from writing it, but at the same time, you can just way overcompensate for that by doing way more volume. And so you don't really need to like I don't remember things because I write them down. If that were the case, I would write essays all day long. I remember things because I study them with repetition and connect them to things that I already know. So that's why I do a lot of volume. And each flashcard, I average about 8 seconds per card. So yeah, it can be a lot sometimes, and it's like annoying. But my rule is I can't go to bed until I've done all the flashcards. So, and when you do it that way, because like I do 50 new cards per day per class. So when you do it that way, you pretty much never have to cram. Like classes ended at the, let's see, my last class was like 2 weeks ago. And at that point I had learned all of the material for all of my courses. And so now that finals are here, I'm kind of just chilling. Like I don't need to study. I'm just reviewing. And then a couple days before the exam, I'll do a couple practice exams, and I'm good to go. And that's pretty much in my life for the last like year and a half now. I just like, when classes are done, I'm done studying. And so I kind of like front load all the work. And so while people are like freaking out for exams, I'm kind of just like, I get an extra 2 weeks of break. And the exam's actually kind of fun because I know the information so well. I'm just like, oh yeah, I can't wait to like show what I learned. You know? How to make yourself eat healthier and work out. Don't make yourself want to do it. As soon as you make yourself do something, so you'll stick with things because they're due to, you know, they're intrinsic or they're identified. But even that eventually becomes intrinsic because you like being in line with your actions. You like the fact that your actions speak to your identity, and that becomes intrinsic. Well, that would be, yeah, well, somewhat. That'd be integrated motivation. There's a lot of different types, but yeah, I just don't make yourself do it. Find a reason why to get started. Have negative reinforcement, get rid of some uncomfortable feeling, and over time you'll start doing it just for the sake of doing it. Because I mean, not only are there physiological benefits, but it's also like a huge dopamine release. So what's funny enough is that like one of the addictive behaviors, as opposed to like recreational drugs and that sort of thing, is actually exercise. People get addicted to exercise all the time. And then in terms of eating healthier, if you get addicted to like seeing yourself perform better, like you need to measure and have data, but you'll just feel better and you'll perform better. So I like to think of it this way. The overall calorie consumption determines, you know, your energy output. But the macronutrients determine your construction, like how much muscle, fat, like bone structure that you have, right? It's like your physique. And then the micronutrients determine performance. Every time I've gone to just eating like pasta and rice, my performance takes a dip. So I do need to keep eating vegetables. As long, like for so long I hated vegetables, and then I was like, I'll just like systematically reintroduce myself to vegetables because like I need some fiber in my diet. And then yeah, over time I just realized like, oh, I actually feel better, and so I ate them more. And eventually it was kind of like, you know, you have people say things are like an acquired taste. I just like acquired a taste of not minding. The only vegetables I like are roasted broccoli and carrots, steamed carrots. Other than that, I don't really like vegetables. I wouldn't go out of my way to eat them unless I haven't had them in a while. But a lot of it is just like, because for so long I spent my whole life doing things that I only wanted to do because of my ADHD. And I was just like racking my head around the fact, it's like, I don't know how people can do things they don't want to do. And so at some point I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm just not going to care at all. Like I'm literally just never gonna, I'm not going to think. I'm just going to go through life and just like, just exist and do the things that I'm supposed to do, but like not have any feelings about it. And so I kind of reached this anhedonic state, but it also like, it meant that my baseline was neutral. It didn't make me not capable of feeling happiness or joy. It just meant that like my baseline became neutrality instead of my baseline being like inconsistent. And I just started doing things that I didn't want to do. And now something comes up, like, oh, I have to do that. Oh, okay, fine. I just do it and then move on with my life. So you talk about planning too, right? You guys are going to find this funny, but like I don't plan anything. and it just annoys the shit out of everybody around me because they're like, oh my gosh, like, how does he not have a 10-step plan for blah 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 blah. I'll tell you what I do. I take my notes app on my phone and I write a to-do list from top to bottom, and then as I go through the day I just cross it off. I do this the night before. I got my to-do list the night before. Arrowfit is at the top. Hold on 1 second, I have to turn off this to close the door. Give me 1 sec. I'll be right back. Okay, well, you guys are just gonna have to deal with the fact that the bathroom fan is on because I realized I can't close the door because the tripod is stuck. But anyway, yeah, so I just take my phone and I literally just go through my to-do list and I'm like, all right, well, what's on top? My breathing exercise is always at the top, and then I just go down the list. I know what I have to do because I've taken the assignments, I've broken them down. I'm like, okay, I have to do this today. I guess that's like the only thing I plan. But usually I'll take like an assignment, I'll make like a new note and write an assignment, and it'll be like thing 1, thing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'll just take one and just move it, and I'll just do one thing per day from each assignment, and then by the time I'm like 3 weeks into the semester, I've pretty much finished all my final projects. So yeah. Yeah, it's just like everybody finds it super annoying though. They're like, do you want to do this? I'm like, well, it's like kind of too far ahead for me to think, so I think I'll just decide in like a week. You know, if it's not like immediate, it doesn't demand my attention immediately. Okay. If you had a research paper due in 3 days, what would be your routine? The other routine you went over with familiarizing and spamming practice problems works for STEM, but I struggle with papers. That is a very good question. For assignments, I would honestly, I believe you can write anything or do any project in 3 days. That 3 days is usually how long it takes me to do an assignment. Well, so like 5 days would be optimal, but 3, we can work with that. So first day, I'd read all the instructions, break it down to what you have to do, make the whole outline, and then yeah, maybe write the intro if it's an essay. Second day, write the whole thing. Third day, edit the whole thing and submit. That's usually what ends up happening. And it's very difficult sometimes to finish the whole thing a day before so that I have time to edit. But I also know that I can get about a 30% increase in grade just by reading over my stuff and re-editing it. And so I treat that as like, if I don't want a 60, I better finish it the day before. Like I pretty much have established the fact that, like in my head, that I am guaranteeing myself a 60 if I don't finish it a day before, and then review and edit it and submit it on the next day. That's usually how I go about it. Not gonna lie, you're actually one of the best YouTubers that actually does stuff. Oh, thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to stay away from the BS stuff just because honestly that's what I was told. Like especially when I was in first year and second year, like one of the reasons I even started UofTearless in the first place was because there was no place that I could go that actually answered the questions that I had about studying. And so it kind of just came out of necessity that I did all of my own research and like created all of my own frameworks. And then somewhere along the line, I was just like, well, I feel like a lot of people would probably benefit from knowing this too. So then I just started on Instagram actually. Then I found that the YouTube's actually way better because I can actually take the time to explain things and not have to like compress it into a 60-second video. And it's also just more fun. Like I get to I get to talk and not like read off of a script. Actually, I kind of stopped scripting after a while. But in the beginning, like I would script out the hook and like everything. It was just like a whole thing. So now I just like intuitively know what makes a good hook. So I'll just like cut to like that part. But then like the rest of it, like it's just me explaining how I figured something out and then try to give you like the most realistic answer. Like one, keep in mind what people can actually do, right? Because I think a lot of the time when somebody who has made a lot of progress in their life recommends something, they're like, oh yeah, like I do this now, you do this too. I'm like, no, I don't want to tell you that, because if you could do what I do right now, then you probably wouldn't need my help. I'll recommend what I think you should do at your point, and then also what to do and how to increase it to get to where I ended up. Because it's really hard sometimes. And I think a lot of people miss this. When I was looking for the answers myself of like how to focus and that sort of thing, it was just they don't adjust it to like the general population and like to where I was. They were like, oh yeah, all you have to do is just like lock in all the time and like do this. I'm like, yeah, but I like can't lock in. So like what do I do in that first? Like I have to just basically treat myself like a 5-year-old and then work my way up. And then I was like, well, honestly, I don't think there's any such thing as making something too simple. I think all it does is open the door for more people to understand. It doesn't mean that like, kindergartners are suddenly going to start watching my stuff. I think they probably could. I think they would probably have a hard time understanding, to be honest. But yeah, like most of my stuff is more for like high schoolers and early year university students. But I also like, I know what it was like. Like I actually hated school. I almost dropped out actually, twice. And I went from doing really well in high school to absolutely sucking in university and then having to work my way back up. And so that was even worse because I knew what I could do in high school. And then I was like, well, now I really suck. And so it just had this like very big contrast. And I don't really want anyone to feel like that. I can't plan either. I just write what I need to do, and that's it. Honestly, yeah, that's kind of the way to go. I don't usually plan. I just like write down the steps of like what it's like. I'm very much a person who likes to operationalize things. I completely remove emotion and perspective from the equation when I'm trying to get down to what the actual solution or problem is. So it's like, it doesn't matter how I feel, what needs to get done for an assignment like this to be completed. The intro needs to be written, the paragraphs need to be written, there needs to be this much evidence, this many points need to be made, and the conclusion needs to restate everything but not add anything. And so that's like kind of how I'll just like completely remove emotion from the equation. And then like it doesn't matter how I feel, because I can't get around the fact that like that is the answer, and if I'm not doing it, I can justify it all I want. But I know that I'm not doing the work that needs to be done to get the result that I want. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. Yeah, exactly. We're all over the place. Sometimes it takes a lot of effort to remember many things, even if you make tricks or had reviewed an active recall thrice, and there's not much time to revise more than that for huge syllabuses. So to remember many things. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the time crunch is what makes it hard. Like if you really thought about it, university wouldn't be very hard unless like it's only hard because it's compressed, right? So I think the main thing to focus on here is just the fact that what you're doing can work. Whatever, like even the methods that I used to do in high school, it works because I would spend twice as long as everybody else. And so like I got, I performed towards the top, but I also spent like double the time that the other students did to get there. And that just doesn't fly in university. You don't have time. So I realized, like, yeah, it might work eventually, but all I'm doing is like repeating something so much that I eventually make connections. And then I was like, well, that's just a huge waste of time. You might as well just make connections intentionally instead of waiting for your brain to do it, and then save yourself all that time. So yeah, it's mainly about like finding a faster way to study. And so I built my whole framework. Like, if you've ever heard me talk about, it's the pre-grade framework, like pre-grade, like before grades. So it's like everything you'd have to do. And I structured that around trying to get as much done in as little time as possible, because I had spent 8 hours a day in the library and I was tired of it and I wanted like a life. And then once I started rowing, I really had no time, because that takes like 4.5 hours a day, plus eating and extra sleep, maybe 6 hours a day. And then being a student, 3 hours of lecture, maybe making flashcards for an hour, and then studying for 2 hours. That's 12 hours. And then you're talking about this too. So that's probably like another 3, sometimes 4 hours. So I usually work like 15 to 16 hours per day most days. Figuring out how to sleep well. A lot of things actually can become more efficient. Like sleep, you can sleep a lot better than you think you can. The things that you're mainly messing up in sleep are just, I mean, obviously everybody says, but like using your phone before going to bed, also eating too soon before bed, and not turning down the lights, not having more yellow lights, doing things that are too active, ruminating at night, not sleeping with earplugs or a sleep mask, sleeping too hot, not having fans, comfort of mattress. Like, it's literally, there's like so many different variables. And so I kind of was like, well, if I can optimize sleep, I can optimize the rest of my life a lot better. So I just focused only on sleep, and then everything else came after that. But I didn't have the energy to optimize without sleeping. To give you an idea of how tired I was, during the fall season 2 years ago, I slept 4.5 hours a day. My sleep score every day was around 25%. Like, I just track it on my Garmin, but it was horrible. And I just like, I couldn't focus at all. So like, one of the main things that fixed my focus was actually just sleeping better, especially with ADHD. Like, we get distracted so easily. So that's what I would recommend fixing first, honestly. I know that wasn't the question, but like, I think that's a valuable side tangent. Yeah, I failed my first quarter, so my first semester is split in two. But now second quarter, I gotta lock in. Procrastination ruins a lot. Yeah, it does. Main thing is just like, remove the activation energy that's required for you to start acting. So one of the ways to do that is the way that I talked about, where you just break the assignment up into smaller chunks. There's no such thing as too small, by the way. You can really get a lot out of that, just by having less to do. Like, the perceived effort is so small that you just do it, right? Like, nobody's going to complain about opening their laptop, unless you actually have like an injury, right? But yeah, it's very easy. Just like step one for me would be like, open your laptop, and then open up Google Drive. It's the second step. And then write my name, write my student number, write the due date, and then format it in APA 7 format so it's a title page. Then pick a title. Then write my university. And then write down which paragraphs need to be written. Intro, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, conclusion. That sort of thing. Like, it's just so small that it's almost impossible not to do, because it's way too easy. And you do that again and again. Eventually you go from something being, it's not incomplete or complete. It's 10% complete, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% complete. right? And so it's not actually, it's a way of quantifying how far you've gotten, so you can actually see that you're making progress, because a lot of burnout comes from not seeing, well, this is the way I define burnout, is burnout comes from, well, it's not the definition, but it's what it comes from. So burnout comes from not seeing the results for the amount of work that you're perceiving to be putting in. And so you can do a lot of work, and if you get a huge reward, fine. If you get no reward, you're going to burn out, right? And so you think of an assignment, if you never reward yourself until the very end, then you're missing a lot of opportunity to keep tapping the ball along. And that's why it's really hard to complete it, because it's so long. So if you can just minimize the time between behavior and reward, I like to think of everything as like behaviorism. So the more rewards you can have, the more reinforcing the behavior is, and the more you'll actually like to do assignments. And so one of the easiest ways, and what I found to be the easiest way to get myself to do the work, was just to make the steps to do it so small and then quantify them so that I could see how much progress I made. And that was it. And then I could be like, oh yeah, it's not this giant thing looming over my head. I've actually done 70% of it, instead of like, oh my gosh, I haven't finished this thing. It's not done yet. What do I do? Right? It's like a lot more calming, and a lot of like health and just peace comes from not overthinking things. So, I mean, it's much easier said than done. I used to overthink things a lot, but now, like I said, I just decided one day to like not think about things. I don't really ruminate anymore. And honestly, like, because of ADHD, it's kind of easy. Like, we have a squirrel brain going on when we're trying to think, but we can also just stare at a wall and like not think about anything for a very long time. And because of that, I'm able to just shut everything off. And sometimes my girlfriend will ask me, she's like, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, nothing. And she's like, no, like, what are you actually thinking? Like, clearly there's something. I'm like, no, I'm literally like, I actually have like zero thoughts in my head right now. Like, there's literally just cobwebs. And it's pretty funny because I feel like a lot of people just can't imagine zoning out, but like I zone out for probably 20% of the day. Just like, it also gives my brain a little time to rest and like reset. I'll write that in my whiteboard above my monitor. Yeah, small chunks. 90, I wouldn't even say like, oh yeah. So the 90 to 30 minutes, yeah, 90 minutes on, 30 minutes off. Yes. Yeah. I actually did write that near my monitor too. So I have like these little magnetic pads. These are called boogie board pads. I usually don't like recommend most study tools unless I actually find them helpful. It's a company by Boogie Board, not sponsored anyway. I just actually find it good. They're essentially like, here, let me see if I can find the pen here. Okay, so check this out. You have a board, right? It's like, there's a lot of stuff on it right now because it's been scratched up. But you have this pen and you like tap it and it like magnetically erases everything. And so, like, here, watch this. Ready? It's so cool. Boom. So what I did was I would just write like 90, 30 study chunks. And I would just like, they're magnetic, so I would just like stick it to my monitor. And then whenever I would like write other notes too, I would just like erase it, right? Now I don't use them as much, but I did find them helpful for a very long time. So yeah, cool product. I think I just got them on Amazon. You tell me the crux of tackling a chapter or learning it. Honestly, every chapter is different. I wish I could, but I don't think I could give you a generalizable enough answer. So if you had like a specific question, honestly, you can just message me on Instagram and I respond to every DM, so I can just send you a voice message. But but I think I would need a lot more details on the chapter to just know like exactly what you're getting into. I don't want to give you any false information. You got other stuff I can write? Oh man. Okay, well now we can pull out. I have a lot of quotes. I do a lot of thinking. Let's see here. Okay. This is I write all of them down in a document, so whenever I'm like thinking things, I kind of just write them out so I don't forget. So I don't know, it depends what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for like more motivational stuff, that would be in a different document. But there's something that I call the well-being baseline, which I think is pretty important, which is the minimum self-care required for one's average performance. That would kind of go along the line of allostasis. But that's what I find is like very valuable. It's just to know what your well-being baseline is. And when you know, it's actually very powerful because it means, you know, there's a lot of things that I actually did to like decrease this. So like I don't need a lot to be doing really well. And like almost nothing gets me angry or upset or like, you know, I get like pissed off sometimes, but it's only if like I'm very particular. So if I can control something and it's out of control, then I'll kind of get like a little bit out of sorts, but I'm never like angry or sad really. It comes down to like being very accepting of yourself. Here's something that I've found that I haven't written down, but I actually think it's incredibly valuable. Health and you know, I just finished my health psych class. Health and like I guess mental health and confidence in yourself is not about who heals the most, but it's more so about the person who no longer believes that they're broken. And when you accept that you're not broken and there's nothing wrong with you and you're just human, and we all procrastinate and we all have issues, we all get sick, and we all don't like doing things that are hard because that's human nature and we try to avoid them, it takes a lot of the pressure off of trying to perform. And I like to treat myself like I'm in like cognitive behavioral therapy with myself. And so I kind of have this unconditional positive regard for the fact that I can make a lot of mistakes and I'm never gonna, you know, beat myself up for it. The only thing that happens is I learn. And yeah, it really sucks if you make a bad mistake, but you also did the best you could with the tools that you had at the time. And so you can't really hold yourself accountable for that. I mean, yeah, obviously take accountability because it was you and you did it, but you can't beat yourself up for not knowing better because you didn't know better. And the only reason you can beat yourself up and you have the ability to is because now you know better, but you didn't before. So, and every situation is different. Maybe if you make the same mistake over and over again, it's still, every situation is different. You don't know what will happen this time. But eventually, obviously, try to use background context to realize that that's probably not the right decision. But even then, if it happens, like, you can't beat yourself up. And that's one way that I've lowered my well-being baseline to now, like, I'd be fine if I just had like a cot and like something to do. That's pretty much my well-being baseline, and like food and water. I'm so unmotivated to study right now, but I have to complete like 2 chapters. Please tell me how. Okay. Here is how to complete chapters of a textbook even though you're super unmotivated. I got you. You ready? First thing you're going to do is open the textbook. Then once you've opened the textbook, you're going to read the first sentence. You're going to read the last sentence of the first of whatever chapter it is. Then you're going to read all the bolded words and all the headers. It's going to give you a really good understanding of what's going to be in the chapter. Then you can go walk away and do whatever you want and get distracted. Just don't get distracted for too long. Then when you come back, at least you're going to know what you're reading. And so it's not going to be scary. And you're not going to procrastinate because you're like, oh, I actually know that it's not too bad. I can handle it. And you'll go and read it. Then when you read it, this is like fun. The foundation of speed reading is that knowing something before and doing the first sentence, last sentence, bolded words. I'm not going to teach you to speed read on this live stream, but like I have done videos on that if you want to go check them out. But essentially, knowing what you're going to be reading about makes it a lot less scary and a lot easier to start. So that's what I would recommend if you're really unmotivated to do it. Also, one other thing, you can reward yourself for doing work, I think a lot of us don't. We expect that work is what we're supposed to do. And so we don't reward ourselves for it. And we only punish ourselves for not doing work. So what happens is the only commonality between those two scenarios is work. And so your brain starts to learn, if I do work, there may or may not be a punishment. And if I don't do work, there's a guarantee of no punishment. So it stops doing the work. So you need to introduce a reward and then actually reward yourself, because if you tell yourself you're going to reward yourself and then you're like, no, I actually don't need the reward, that just programs your brain to not trust yourself when you say that you're going to get a reward, or trust anyone, actually, because the reward then becomes not an incentive for anything. And you're kind of just pushing yourself to work with no reward. Again, that's burnout. And so the brain will try to regress, keep you safe, and you won't be able to work. So introduce reward and then have an understanding of what you're going to read before you read it. I think that's probably my two biggest tips. How should you build stable motivation that doesn't rely on mood and inspiration? I'm going to answer this part of the question first. Don't build stable motivation. If you think about this, define motivation. So I define motivation as the want and or the pursuit of something that you don't have. So to build stable motivation, you don't need to build anything. You just need to have something that you want. And that's enough motivation. And that's honestly all the motivation you're going to get. The only way to increase motivation temporarily is to create a feeling of more loss, more pain. So if I were to say, if somebody said, motivate me to study, I would be like, okay, what is it that you want to get from study? And they're like, I want to get a good job that pays me a lot of money. I'm like, okay, why do you want that? Well, I want to be like socially accepted and have status. Okay, well, that's pretty big motivation. Now I could motivate you on the status part, and the studying is just a vector. The reason you can't be motivated to work is because you have a lot of work to do. And so you can't, by definition, want to do something that you don't have if you have a lot of work to do. And you also can't be motivated to complete the work because you've already completed a lot of work to get to where you are now. So you have both, they're both plentiful. And so asking for motivation to do work is not really the appropriate question to be asking. Instead, you should be asking, how can I motivate myself to achieve my end goal? But you have to know what that end goal is. And as soon as you know that, you won't really need motivation because you won't have it until you get there. And doing the work and like studying, that's just a vector. You don't need to be motivated to do it. That's just the steps along the way. It's the same thing as opening a computer and, you know, typing your name, opening Google Drive, writing your student number. Those are all steps. Studying is just a larger step, but it's still on the same path. I think you don't need motivation at all, honestly, because if you think about it this way too, have you ever done work without motivation? If you have, it means you don't need it to do work. So if it's not a necessity and you can't rely on it, then your energy is better spent doing or figuring out how to work when motivation isn't there. And so now you should be asking, how can I become incredibly unmotivated so I can practice working when I'm unmotivated? Because the days you get up and you don't want to do things and, you know, doing the work that nobody wants to do, that is actually the dream, because the end goal doesn't mean anything without the sacrifice. I could give you a first place trophy, but if you did nothing to earn it, you wouldn't care. It would just be garbage and you'd probably throw it away. Basically, the layering process, basic first, the whole chapter, second layer is the medium. Yes, basically the layering process. How to stay on track while suffering from mental illness and depression, and the people around you keep bringing up the same mistakes. Oh, the people around you keep bringing up the same mistakes you've made over and over, which further builds guilt. Okay. I'm going to ask you to be brave, because I had the same situation happen to me, and the only thing that got me through it was two things. One, I actually said something about it. So somebody kept bringing up the situation that I remembered and was not proud of. And being around that person, I just was reminded of the person that I used to be who I didn't like. And as soon as I stopped identifying as that person, I no longer wanted to be reminded, not because it made me uncomfortable, but just because it was a misidentification of who I now was. And that's what irritated me. So I simply told him, I was just like, look, I'm not that person anymore. I'd appreciate it if you didn't bring it up anymore, because you're trying to relive those moments. But to me, I'm trying to move forward, and I'd rather not live in the past. Then he didn't stop, so I just stopped talking to him. But you know, you have to be okay letting go of friends who don't actively build you up. It is so much more impactful to your life to remove a negative relationship than to add a positive one. You will be much, much better off removing a negative relationship. It will, think of it this way. If there's if there's somebody standing on a chair and somebody standing on the ground, who's going to have an easier time pulling that person to their level? It's way easier to pull the person down, but it also doesn't help you get on the chair. And so that person's trying to, maybe they see you changing, get to where you are by relating to you, try to get up to your level, but instead all they know, the only thing that they have in common now, because they haven't done the work that you have done, is relating you back to them. And that's pulling you back, but it's not helping them come up. And so it's literally only a negative. And as much as you enjoy that person's company, I will say this about everyone on earth. I promise you, for every person that you know that you have a problem with one part of them, one, people are people, right? Sometimes we just accept it because we like but we love despite. So if you love somebody, you will love them despite all the things that annoy you. But for every person on earth, I promise you that there is somebody similar who does not have that negative thing. It is just a question of finding them But a lot of the time, if you do so much work that people want to be around you and respect you for doing something, you won't have to go look for them. They'll come to you. I do have to get running because I told my friend I'd be somewhere at 2 and or 2:30, but I think I will still be late. So I'm gonna hop off this live. I will possibly do another one later tonight, answer more questions if you have any. So if you have any more personal questions, you can always just message me on Instagram and I'll try to answer them. If it is a common enough question, then I'll probably answer it here too. So that's it for now. This live stream's been an hour, 40 minutes. But yeah, I'll see you later. I'll try to do more of these every day.